Damos inicio a nuestra segunda conferencia de este segundo día del Congreso Internacional de Rock y Metal Año Cero. Mi nombre es Rita Osnaya y hoy tendré el enorme placer de presentarles a nuestra siguiente conferencista, Amanda Di Gioia, con su trabajo I'm here to turn up the volume, a select analysis of heavy metal music in horror. Amanda, hello. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so
Thank you,
excited
Amanda.
to
Welcome.
be here.
Thank you, Amanda. I will proceed to read your bio. Amanda Di Gioia es doctorante en la Escuela de Estudios Eslavos y de Europa del Este de la Universidad College de Londres. Su más reciente monografía, Género y Crianza en los mundos de Alien y Blade Runner, un análisis feminista, fue publicado por la editorial Emerald Publishing Limited en agosto del presente año. Otras monografías de Amanda incluyen parto y crianza en textos de horror, Los marginados y los monstruosos, igualmente publicado por Emerald Publishing Limited en 2017, y Duelo, la imaginación cultural rusa y masculinidad en crisis, publicado por Routledge en 2020. Por cuestiones técnicas, la participación de Amanda ya se encuentra grabada, pero ella nos va a estar acompañando para darle espacio a la sesión de preguntas y respuestas. Así que les invitamos a dejar su comentario, su pregunta, ya sea aquí en el chat de la sesión de Zoom o bien a través de los comentarios en Facebook. Amanda los va a estar contestando conforme ustedes vayan escribiéndoles y también podremos dejar algunos al final. Amanda, I also explained the way we're going to manage your participation throughout your conference to end up with the Q&As. So, with that being said, should we?
Let's rock.
Alfredo, please.
Hello, my name's Amanda Di Gioia. I'm a PhD student at the University College London School of Slavonic and East European Studies. My latest academic monograph, Gender and Parenting in the Worlds of Alien and Blade Runner, was published in August of 2021 by Emerald Academic Publishing. And the title of my keynote is I'm Here to Turn Up the Volume, a select analysis of heavy metal music in horror. Because of side effects from the medication I take for my heart failure, I recorded this keynote over the course of 2 days. The question I ask for this keynote is, do horror and heavy metal really go hand in hand? This presentation will examine the impact of heavy metal music in horror texts. By using analysis of fiction, I examine the connections and contradictions between heavy metal music and horror texts. So currently, the scholarship argues that horror texts and heavy metal music have recently begun to intersect in horror films, which some scholars say is done to incorporate two specific niche audiences based on their shared similar interests. Some scholars argue that subversion is another commonality that horror texts and heavy metal music share. However, as I have stated in my previously published academic work, while this may be accurate in some capacities, regarding issues surrounding gender, this is often not the case in either horror texts or heavy metal music. Depictions of motherhood in both genres typically relies upon tropes. Furthermore, women are constantly depicted as being the victims of violence in both genres. Violence against women is a societal norm. According to a new study released by the United Nations this year, violence against women is endemic in every country and every culture. That is why my published scholarly work argues that when it comes to issues regarding gender, horror texts and heavy metal music oftentimes, but not always, note that I said oftentimes but not always, are not subversive. Before we go further, I wanted to do a little housekeeping. For the record, there are more than two genders. Sex is anything but binary, and any gender can be a victim of violence or abuse. So, if you wanted to hear what I had to say regarding my previously published work, you would read my previously published work. So, I wanted to use this keynote to do something a little different. I used this opportunity to analyze two texts by Adam Neville, as well as interview and analyze the responses of horror text writer and horror film director John Doolan. I thought it would be good to interview a creator because we so often solely hear the opinions of academics regarding these topics. And I thought having a creator share their thoughts would be a good change of pace for everyone. So I'm going to analyze the works of Adam Neville first. So I went over this text very briefly. This is the first of the two novels by Adam Neville that I looked at, and this one is called Under a Watchful Eye. Neville connects horror and heavy metal music on his own within this work. He lets us know that the individual that likes both of them isn't someone that you would want to be friends with or be around. The metalhead in this text, Ewan, is an unhygienic individual who is often inappropriate, be it in public or in private, and just generally repulsive to practically everyone around him. That being said, this quote sounds like some of the black metal theory I've read in the past, so I wanted to share it in its entirety. He began to unwind and rewind his memories of Ewan. Ewan's big red fist leaving dents in the door. Death metal. Black metal. The sounds of hell making the speakers of that MIDI system in his room crackle and spit like fat in a fire. Hellfire. Horror films on VHS. All night. In this text, Neville, again, connects horror and heavy metal music upon his own volition and lets the reader know that the metalhead is spooky and not someone you want to be around. He also uses similar language throughout both works I analyzed regarding the speaker and the sound. The second novel is called The Ritual. The Ritual was made into a movie in 2017. However, for the purposes of this presentation, I am just referencing the novel. So the novel is about a group of university friends that take a hiking trip to the Nordic woods as a means to see each other again. However, they're all really struggling to reconnect on this trip, even though they were all really close in university. This subsequent scene that the quote is from occurs after a character named Luke is knocked out because as the group is hiking, they discover they're being pursued by a supernatural or bizarre creature in the Nordic wood. What's interesting in The Ritual is that we find out that the true evil in this novel isn't in this supernatural or seemingly supernatural creature in the woods that's slaughtering all of Luke's friends. It's in this heavy metal band. Luke wakes up, and while he's half asleep, Luke initially thinks there's a swarm of insects in the room he's in. Here's the quote: "The entire room was not filled with a million insects buzzing against each other inside some giant smoking hive. These were guitar strings being shredded rapidly and amplified into distortion. The speakers so worn, damaged, and too small for the task set them. They crackled and snapped like cooking fat." Luke ends up being the only survivor from this group of friends. He wakes up a captive and attempts to speak with one of his captors as a means to gain rapport. The only thing that Luke can initially ascertain about his captors is that they're young. There's three of them, and they're younger rather than older people. He also quickly realizes that they're in a cabin. Upon hearing Luke say he is from London, one of the three youths, who is about to sacrifice Luke to this creature in the woods, which had previously killed all of Luke's friends, a character that we later learn is called Fenris, says that he wants to play at a famous metal bar in London, the Camden Underworld. He connects London with this famous metal club. The Underworld's a real life club. I've been to gigs there. So this is a good call by Luke because it gets his captor excited and starting to talk to him. So Fenris asks Luke if Luke knows about true black metal and asks Luke to name some bands. And Luke is struggling to think of band names because the majority of the time the customers just head straight to this back section of the shop that's dingy, that has the metal music. So Luke immediately names Dimmu Borgir. And the youth spits and says that they're posers. And then Luke names Cradle of Filth. And doesn't get a reaction from Fenris. After that, Luke says Venom. And then he gets a reaction from Fenris. Fenris smiles and says, "The Masters. Now we are getting somewhere." Fenris goes on to say that Luke clearly needs to be educated. Luke needs to listen to Emperor, Darkthrone, Burzum, Satyricon, and Bathory. Fenris says that his shop is pretty garbage because they don't carry a Blood Frenzy album. It's a bad shop because Luke did not immediately name Blood Frenzy as one of the true black metal bands. We, the readers, soon learn that that's Fenris's band. We subsequently learn that Luke is being held hostage by a Norwegian black metal band. Fenris is the drummer. They are going to sacrifice Luke to what they believe is a primordial forest god, what Luke knows as this horrific supernatural creature or seemingly supernatural creature that has killed every single one of his friends. Now, a white man metalhead gatekeeping someone over their metal music knowledge, this I can believe because it's happened to me. But seriously, after reading this chapter, I wonder if Neville worked in a record store or a CD shop and got this kind of stuff all of the time, because the gatekeeping sequence is pretty well written. Later on in the novel, we find out why Blood Frenzy wants to sacrifice Luke to the forest creature that they believe is a god. Quote in its entirety states, "This is still my true land. and I come back from the world to be here, to get away, to come where there are no fucking Christians, no rules, no social democrats, or humanist bastards. We have awoken, Luke, and we want our fellow Vikings to awake too. We show them how, up here, with our music. It will be special, Luke. We are working on something very intense, my friend. It will have the voice of the Elder God in it, saying, Arise. When I read this, I thought as a reader, but does Blood Frenzy really want to create a call to arms for their fellow Vikings? Or do they want to use this voice of the Elder God to sell records as a gimmick almost? Additionally, the members of Blood Frenzy are neo-Nazis and neo-Nazi sympathizers who burn Norwegian churches, again, perhaps to sell more records. And within the text itself, Luke calls them a cliche. This did not stop Neville from writing it. Regardless of the intention, it is heavily implied that all the characters who enjoy metal in these two texts from Neville are suffering from severe mental health challenges and a lack of empathy. Once is a coincidence, twice is a trend. Neville not only connects horror and heavy metal, he paints heavy metal music fans as being horrific and uses a broad brush and generalized stereotypes, some of which I personally found borderline offensive. So, what do I find offensive or borderline offensive about the Ritual's portrayal of metalheads and Neville's portrayal of metalheads generally throughout his horror novels? Before I go any further, I have to recognize the fact that heavy metal does have a Nazi and neo Nazi problem. If you asked me, what would the appropriate number of Nazis or neo Nazis be in the heavy metal music scene? My answer is zero. None. There should be nobody with those types of views within this subculture, this scene, and the bands that play in it. We have to confront it, call it out, and make sure the people that support those beliefs feel unwelcome and unsupported. With that being said, not every, you know, metalhead is a neo-Nazi sympathizer or a Nazi. Not every metalhead thinks that burning down a church is cool or acceptable, or attacking any house of worship is something that we should adulate. Both novels have characters that listen to these bands. Bathory, Satyricon, and Venom. And all the characters who listen to these bands are evil or disturbed or murderers or fascists. Listening to these bands is not indicative of any of these things. Neville also consistently portrays metalheads as bizarre outcast misfits, which makes this choice to have Blood Frenzy as a NSBM black metal band feel cheap and lazy instead of genuine. Neville portrays individuals with mental health challenges as being inherently dangerous. I don't like that. This also supports stigma against those with mental health challenges. Many individuals with mental health challenges are more likely to be the victims of violence in lieu of being the perpetrators of violence. Being in a heavy metal band or listening to heavy metal music is not what is causing these characters to do this. The lack of mental health support and resources present to prevent them from getting to this point. Heavy metal isn't the problem here. Patriarchy is.
That's because the more a man associates with the patriarchal ideal of masculinity, which is very constricting and limited and narrow, the less likely they are to seek mental health resources or counseling. Patriarchy hurts men too.
But I wonder if Neville got inspiration from stories in the news media. The acknowledgments of the ritual do say that Neville read Lords of Chaos prior to writing it, and it's evident that he did, for better or for worse. He quotes real life Norwegian black metalers that are neo Nazis and murderers. The quote right next to me mentions two of them, Varg and Bard Faust. They were black metal killers, revolutionaries. They light the path for us. So I wonder almost if Neville got his information from the media and just took it from there, or if Neville was pushed too far by a former customer, if he worked in a record shop or worked in a place where they sold CDs. Before I start this section, I want to add all the mothers in Neville's work are women or female. Understanding that genders other than women can and do give birth, genders other than women can call themselves mothers. These individuals are valid and are just as much of a mother to their children as a cis woman would be. So, moving back to the ritual, the three members of Blood Frenzy have imprisoned Luke in the house of an elderly woman. They've taken it over. It's implied that she doesn't want to resist because she's old and she's small. She's 4 feet tall but has incredibly loud footsteps. But this elderly woman with the loud feet is contextualized as a mother by Neville. On page 328, he writes that her embedded eyes glinted black with fury and also with fear, like those of a mother afraid for her young. Luke also notes that she's different, or that she has a connection with this creature that's murdered all his friends because she can call it. And the reason that we, the reader, know that the woman can call Moder is because Blood Frenzy pressures her to. They demand that she call Moder because they want to sacrifice Luke like a Nazarene, they say. Ugh, so that's how we learn that the woman can call Moder. The woman also seems to really care for Moder. And all the depictions of Moder that you see in this keynote are from the film. But again, the novel is very different. Also, during the scene where Luke is strung up like a Nazarene, he has a hallucination and he sees what the reader is led to believe is the birth of this elderly woman who lives in this cabin. Quote from that scene is, "Here is a thing wet and mewling that he cannot quite see, both of man and of another place, drawn out by its rear hooves from between pale and lifeless thighs. It is brought out of the steaming, devastated womb of the dead mother and is clutched by the long fingers of those who witness a miracle." In this portion of text, Neville reveals what he flat out tells the reader later on, which is the reason the elderly woman's feet are so loud is because they're not human feet at all. They are hooves. And like I said previously, the youths are holding this woman's house hostage because this woman who's really not human can summon this creature. Interestingly, both the woman and the creature have no given names. Like I stated previously in my publication of Metal Music Studies, in many horror texts and in many metal music songs where mothers are featured. These women are only known as mothers and they don't have any given names.
There are rare exceptions to this. Typo Negative's Nettie is one I could think about off of the top of my head. Which Peter Steele wrote about his mother, Annette. Understanding that these examples are few and far between, generally mothers both in metal and in horror are unnamed.
And later, when this elderly woman who isn't entirely all human calls this supernaturally created being in the woods or this supernatural being in the woods, we never really find out really what's going on with this creature. The movie calls it a Jotun. The novel really doesn't explicitly state it as not the creature is a goat is left as ambiguous in the novel. However, when Luke and his friends discover an effigy or an idol of the creature, the thing that horrifies Luke the most is the fact that the goat has teeth. Not that the goat has a horrifying mouth that could easily consume him and his friends. It's the fact that the goat has teeth, which aligns with a lot of Barbara Creed's work on mother and monstrosity. Additionally, goats are also connected with the maternal. Now, in Valhalla, there's that goat that provides everyone mead via their udder. Zeus's foster mother is a goat. And although Amalthea is in the Greco Roman canon, I find it interesting that Moder is both a goat and a goat with teeth. Additionally, if Moder is a Yule goat, why not provide Moder a more appropriate sacrifice? And I don't know, perhaps wassail, or perhaps play a Yuletide relevant Trans-Siberian Orchestra album to lure Moder in lieu of what I assume is Blood Frenzy's shitty NSBM record. Basically, when this small woman with hooved cloven feet summons this creature, deity, monster, whatever, the noise emanating out of her rivals anything coming from the speakers. So the call for this creature is metal. She's saying words, but Luke doesn't know what she's saying, except for one word, Moder, or mother. Creature that has killed all of Luke's friends and that Luke has been combating this entire time is a mother, Moder. And Luke later observes that Moder has many children. Now, I don't want to spoil the ending of the novel for you, but I'm going to connect Neville's work with my previous publications. So I also must state that Luke flat out tells Blood Frenzy and the people in the black metal band that they're cliches. Maybe subconsciously or consciously, Neville knows that he wrote a black metal band that's cliche ridden. So maybe that's a signpost for the reader that we shouldn't take anything that he's written regarding the black metal band too seriously, and perhaps we as readers shouldn't generalize all metal music fans as being like this fictional black metal band, Blood Frenzy. However, I argue that Neville's book is riddled with cliches regarding motherhood, metal, and horror texts too. Here are just a few. The land and nature are often gendered as being female and are the source of an overwhelmingly destructive power that cis men cannot combat. This is perhaps because of how both women and land and nature are stereotyped as being nurturers and caregivers. Like I mentioned previously, the mothers are not named, like Lemminkainen's mother or Grendel's mother. And the mothers within this ritual
Die unforgiven. If they die, no spoilers. To recap, the work of Adam Neville relies on a lot of tropes regarding motherhood that I have touched upon in my previously published academic work. Additionally, Neville relies on a lot of generalizations and stereotypes regarding metalheads and individuals who are suffering from mental health challenges. That doesn't mean that Neville's works aren't worthy of future study or that Neville's works are all bad all the time. Actually, I found a lot of the scenes that Neville wrote between the four university friends really well written and really engaging in the ritual. To me, the ritual took a nosedive as soon as Blood Frenzy showed up, frankly. I can't really say the same about Under a Watchful Eye. I particularly didn't enjoy that one. Understanding that, Neville's work reinforces my previous publications on horror, heavy metal music, and parenting. And both the texts and the themes within them are worthy of future study.
a reminder, this next portion of the keynote is going to be an interview with horror film writer and director John Doolin, pictured. I asked Doolin 7 questions. 2 of the questions are just fun ones about subjects I like to talk about or I like to think about. The rest of them are centered around this topic. Doolin is a writer and director. Some of his most recent work includes the Stalker's Prey trilogy, a collection of 3 horror films featured on the Lifetime television network. Stalker's Prey, A Predator Returns, and A Predator's Obsession. To start, Doolin gave some generalized comments. I quote, "As a screenwriter, I make playlists when crafting a movie. Music is so important when crafting a mood." End quote. Doolin says that he assigns songs to characters and views music in film as a tell for the audience. The music often reveals a character for who they are. When speaking to actors who perform his written work, Doolin often tells them, "This character would listen to this song," or "This character reminds me of this musical genre." Actors find this very helpful. Doolin also loves music with a good vibe and tone. When selecting music for his characters, whether or not the music is diegetic is particularly important to Doolin. Doolin said that music is imperative to both movies and filmmaking. For low-budget filmmakers, rights to songs are so hard to afford on occasion. We'll get into this a little later. What are some of your favorite horror movie music moments? Are any of them metal? So, Doolin has quite a few horror movie music moments that are his favorites. Doolin noted that this is because film is collaborative. Doolin said you only need to look back at the older horror films from the 30s that had a score. Music is important to every genre of film, and particularly horror. I agree with Doolin. Some of Doolin's favorite horror movie music moments include scenes from Jennifer's Body, Night of the Demons, and Scream. Doolin also mentioned Bride of Chucky. Bride of Chucky features a strong opening credit sequence to Living Dead Girl, performed by Rob Zombie. Doolin also notes that the scene is unbelievably queer. Additionally, Doolin mentioned the entire Queen of the Damned soundtrack. Doolin noted it is metal. Doolin thinks it's amazing. Doolin knew it was curated for the film Queen of the Damned itself. The songs for the Stats Band were written and performed by Jonathan Davis of the nu metal band Korn. Doolin said he found Queen of the Damned enjoyable, even though the movie is bad, because of the film's elevated camp level. And I must give credit where credit is due. Doolin described the film in the interview as being a masterpiece. I love that term and will utilize it in my everyday life. I first heard it from John Doolin. Masterpiece. What a wonderfully apt description of Queen of the Damned. There's a quote from Hellraiser 3 in the title of this keynote. The club featured within the movie is called the Boiler Room and is the subject of the second question I asked Doolin. Is the LGBTQIA subculture and heavy metal music scene crossover club in Hellraiser 3 believable? Doolin does buy this crossover, and to him, it is believable. Doolin thought it was interesting to see this correlation. Because the queer community is constantly framed as being the figurative other, Doolin's response also drew upon personal experience. Doolin said that a local gay club, Partners, pictured, has had a long-standing goth night where straight metalheads go to party, as well as local LGBTQIA subculture members. They go to, and I quote, Doolin, goth out. So it's a place where everyone mingles together. Doolin said that both the queer community and the metal community are sometimes framed by society as being anti-Christian or not a Christian thing to do. This also correlates with Pinhead and Hellraiser, as Pinhead is a priest of the Order of the Gash. In hell, didn't know what type of bar Hellraiser 3's Boiler Room is, as it is totally experimental. It's not quite a metal bar, not quite a leather bar for leather daddies. Doolin said, and I agree, that it is a bar that can only be in a 90s horror movie. Doolin said, Pinhead represents everything you've been told you shouldn't indulge in, giving into your pleasures that you are told shouldn't be given into. Doolin enjoys the music choices in Hellraiser. He particularly loves the cover of the Hellraiser song by Motorhead. And anytime he watches Hellraiser 3, he watches right until the very end of the credits so he can listen to Hellraiser and rock out to the very end. Doolin also noted that Clive Barker said Hellraiser 3 needed to be more perverse, but Doolin thought the film is still a good middle ground between Clive Barker and making a text digestible to a mainstream audience. Based on that, I wonder if this is why the production team and the creative team behind Hellraiser 3 opted to use metal. It's immediately signifying other to a mainstream audience. Also, anecdotally, when I was in Helsinki one time, I randomly ran into a guy from the New Haven metal music scene. I was born in New Haven. I miss New Haven every day. His nickname is Black Metal Guy, at least among my friend group. Well, when I was at this bar in Helsinki, Black Metal Guy and I were talking and catching up about New Haven and what we miss about New Haven, and we both missed partners a lot. Myself, because a lot of my friends are regulars there, and I had some great times there. Black Metal Guy missed partners because he used to do karaoke there. And then Black Metal Guy told me about how much he genuinely loves, respects, adores, and adulates Pepper LaBeija from Paris is Burning. Black Metal Guy thinks that Pepper LaBeija has incredible stage presence, has incredible corporeal styling, and has incredible confidence and wit. And I agree with Black Metal Guy on all accounts. I had no idea that this adulation of Pepper LaBeija was something that Black Metal Guy generally does. So, could Hellraiser 3's Boiler Room exist in real life? Potentially in some scenes locally, yeah. Now, this doesn't mean that oppressive power structures or hegemonic social hierarchies that are toxic are not also present within these places. However, in some local communities, heavy metal music scenes and queer communities do intersect. Black Metal Guy used a phrase, Cult La Beja Eternal. The next question I asked Doolin was, do remakes of classic horror films rely on heavy metal to retain and / or attract audiences? When I asked Doolin this question, I had Down with the Sickness by Disturbed, which was incredibly overplayed in the reboot / remake of Dawn of the Dead. So Doolin responded that reboots of classic films were coming out in the early aughts, and that the soundtracks were big selling points for this reboot, remake genre of film. And that many involved in the upper echelons of production think that the horror movie audience and the metal music audience are the same. And Doolin also added, and I think this is important that he did, Doolin added correctly that there is a crossover, but it's not exclusive. Horror movie fans are a lot more diverse than being just a collection of metalheads. And then Doolin noted that Freddy vs. Jason is the biggest culprit of this. It's this really bombastic who's who at the time of metal and alternative rock, and a lot of the lyrics have nothing to do with the film itself. Late 90s soundtracks, in contrast to Doolin, are a lot more subtle. And I also agree with Doolin here. So the next question I asked Doolin was, what genres of music would Satan enjoy? Doolin responded that people automatically assume Satan would love metal music. However, Doolin said that after hearing all the din and noise emanating from the bowels of hell, Satan would probably want to relax at the end of the day and would probably listen to happy pop music. Doolin believes that Satan is a Carly Rae Jepsen fan. Doolin expanded upon this thought by saying that if the queer community, which Doolin is a part of, is stereotyped as loving pop music and believed by some to be abomination, therefore, and I quote Doolin here, if we are an abomination, we are going to love the same type of music as Satan. Satan loves bubblegum pop as much as the queer community is stereotyped as loving bubblegum pop. I buy this. Call Me Maybe is an earworm that could only be spawned within the forges of the fires of. The next question I asked Doolin was, what are some of your least favorite and most favorite horror movie soundtrack tropes? So, like I mentioned earlier, Doolin's least favorite trope when songs don't fit the plot or when songs are utilized to try and sell something, or there's an overt effort to try and sell you something, but the music just doesn't fit in. So Doolin mentioned the Freddy vs. Jason soundtrack again because it had all these metal tracks and songs that often had little or nothing to do with the plot of the film. Most favorite. Doolin loves a good cover track like Patsy Cline's Crazy in Bride of Chucky, which was covered. Doolin also loves hearing a song that you don't expect in a movie. Doolin said that Rob Zombie is really good at this. Example given was The Devil's Rejects, when the needle drops and Freebird by Leonard Skinner is played during the shootout scene. Doolin also mentioned the use of I Got Five on It. In Us. And I thought that was a fantastic example. And a fantastic song, might I add. I wanted to elaborate on the use of covers because Doolin is an independent filmmaking. He uses covers to save money because sometimes, as stated previously in this presentation, licensing fees are expensive. For filmmakers with smaller budgets, they oftentimes simply can't afford the licensing fees. An example from Doolin's own work can be found in the Stalker's Prey trilogy. That song is You Made Me Love You. I didn't want to do it.
I didn't want to do it.
This is a classic song that was top of the charts in September 1913, and each of Doolin's films in this trilogy use a cover. And this song evokes a mood that you can play into. Doolin describes it as being a romantic song about being fucked over. And even though these films are horrific and have elements of horror and thriller in it, there's also elements of romance in all of his movies in this trilogy. These movies are about lies and gaslighting. And this song is a shortcut. So you don't need to explain exponential plot, like Hellraiser in Hellraiser 3. The next question I asked Doolin was whether or not he thought the line "death by stereo" in The Lost Boys is iconic or tacky. Doolin thinks that the Lost Boys soundtrack rules. Doolin described it as being rock, vampire, a musical extravaganza that is queer, gaudy, over the top, funny, scary, and everything he likes about a movie. Death by Stereo, to Doolin, is an iconic line and not a corny one because it summarizes what the movie is. It's an antique from the late 80s. It's a screenshot of an era. That's why we love it. Doolin also described the movie as being metal as fuck and noted that music is so important in The Lost Boys. So why not throw in a cheesy movie line? Doolin ended this discussion by saying that he would never speak ill of The Lost Boys. He wasn't going to do it. And quite frankly, same. I will defend The Lost Boys until I die or am transformed into a vampire myself. Whether or not he thought Love Song for a Vampire by Annie Lennox, which is the theme song to Bram Stoker's Dracula, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, was metal or not. So again, to quote Doolin, Doolin thinks that this song is super fucking metal, end quote. And Doolin mentioned, and this is true, that metal as fuck is now everyday slang. And it means that something is totally badass. So Doolin noted, and this is true, that this is a type of song that can exist only in the early 90s. It's a great song to Doolin, and even though a lot of these movies coming out at this time that were period pieces were viewed as needing a really great accompanying theme song in order to get an Oscar nom, this song still has an edge to it. And to me and Doolin both, that's what makes it metal. So Doolin ended this section of questioning by saying it's not a sappy love song, it's Annie Lennox, call it metal, it's metal as fuck. Now, I agree with this because to me, a part of being subversive, which metal should be and horror should be, is being revolutionary. This is why I think artists like Little Richard are metal. And Lennox could have written a canned Oscar bait hit. But instead, Lennox created a work of art. And I agree. It is metal as fuck. There are numerous conclusions that can be drawn from John Doolin's interview responses. Understanding that, here are just a few. The first is that low budget filmmakers face a variety of challenges due to the nature of their work. Because licensing fees for songs are out of their budget, they have to make unique decisions regarding their soundtrack choices. The second is that music and soundtrack choices are important in every genre of film. Understanding that, music and soundtrack choices are particularly important in the genre of horror or horror films. And the third is that many of Doolin's comments about either heavy metal music, the LGBTQIA plus community, or both the LGBTQIA plus community and the heavy metal music scene and subculture simultaneously, aligned with academic work in the literature, particularly Susan Stryker's work on monstrosity, empowerment, and othering as a trans woman, as well as Amber Clifford Napoleone's work on heavy metal music and heavy metal music subcultures and the leather daddy subculture. To conclude this keynote, when analyzing horror texts and heavy metal music, we should keep in mind that many, but not all, of these texts and these music lyrics are written by men, showing how women's bodies and trauma are often up for public consumption. Both horror texts and heavy metal music feature characters or individuals who may feel othered by society in general. However, the crossover to horror text regarding feeling othered is not exclusive to heavy metal music. Thank you all for your time. And I look forward to taking your questions.
¿Me escuchó bien?
Yep, sorry, yep.
Okay. Thank you, Amanda, for your video and your effort with all that music.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm glad people enjoyed it.
Okay, I have two questions.
No fun to do. Go ahead.
Yeah, the first one is for Omar Gonzalez. What do you think about bands like Sodom and Malakesh having central perspectives regarding extreme right festival Stillfest? What strategies can be taken for having a more ethic way of listening to music?
So I can only speak for myself because I'm not the arbiter of what is right or just. I personally opt not to support those bands because I think the best way to hit them is in their wallet. I would never personally share a stage with a neo-Nazi or a Nazi. So I think the option is, it's not like I'm telling everyone to do this, but for me, myself, I opt not to listen to or support them or go to festivals where they play. Or if I'm somehow at a festival and I missed like a band, or I Google a band I don't know and I find that they have those views, I don't watch them play. I leave. I do during their set or something, but that's just something I do. But I'm not the arbiter of what's correct and just for everyone.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. This one is Alfredo. In your opinion, what is the current affair of the studies in horror and metal in Europe? I know there's a journal published by Intellect about horror studies, but what about their intersection with metal? Has that happened before according to your experience?
I know that there's been a couple of articles in metal music studies published on this. I know that there's lots of werewolf and metal discourse. My first article ever was published in horror studies on werewolf and metal discourse. I think maybe in the future there can be a special journal for it, but in the interim, I know that articles on it have been published in metal music studies. I know that articles on it have been published in horror studies, and I think that it's a really exciting field that could only expand in the future.
Okay. Is there any other question for Amanda? There are many comments about that your presentation was very good, Amanda.
Oh, thank
Um,
you.
Yes,
And
so
gracias por su preguntas.
thank you for being chatting with the people here in the chat. So in behalf of all the seminar, we thank you for being here. It was really an honor. Thank you for your video, for your effort and all that. So we look forward to collaborate with you again, Amanda.
Oh, thank you
very
so much for having me. Because of the pandemic and because I have issues with my heart from chemotherapy, I haven't really spoken to people in a long time. So I feel like I'm essentially a feral human, you know, like I'm a little bit of a wild woman myself here because I don't know what to do or how to talk to people. So thank you all for bearing with me as I reacclimate to society.
Thank you very much, Amanda. And thank you for your effort for being here regarding your health and all that. So thank you very
It's
much.
my pleasure. Thank you.
The pleasure is ours. So I think we can end this session. Alfredo.
Sí, pues ya solamente darle las gracias nuevamente a Amanda. Rita, estupenda moderación. Gracias por la traducción. Gracias a Sol, que estuvo en la primera conferencia, a Carlos Arenas, que también estuvo con nosotros, y les esperamos a las 6 de la tarde para el siguiente bloque de conferencias.